evangelism has been the the call of my life. I can't see a person without wanting to see him saved. Traveled there in Kampala, Uganda. The king of the country was kidnapped and taken to India, taken to England by the British. Now, there was trouble in Uganda because of that. People stopped coming to church. And the brethren voted me to go to Kampala, Uganda, knowing there were problems out there, but wanting me to somehow solidify the church. I didn't know about the trouble until I landed, got into the city, and people were boycotting church. So I got my ministers around. There were about 20 ministers from about 5 countries. And I got them together, and we had prayer. I said, now, they wouldn't let me put my tent up anywhere but in an Indian's wood yard. And after I got my tent ready, we said, now, who's coming? Because nobody's going to church. The minister said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. We have an Adventist in the palace. When I say palace, I mean palace. Down in the heart of Uganda, plush Persian rugs, chandeliers from all over. It was a palace. And the king's in London now, and his wife is in the palace. He said, I'm going to get an audience with the Queen. And if we can get the Queen to come to the meeting, I think the people will come. So he went in, and she said she would like to meet me. So the brethren took me. We went into the palace and sat down. Minister of Protocol came in and instructed us how to act in the presence of the Queen. Said, you will go in first and sit down. She will come in, and when she comes in, you stand up and then kneel. Then she will sit down, and then you get up and you sit down. And don't say a word until she addresses you. So we learned all of that. Muderspak, a Norwegian, was the president of the Adventist mission, and the rest of us were African extraction. We went in and sat down. Pretty soon the curtains parted, and this statuesque queen with, I mean, fully clothed from her head down to her ankles, came in and stood and just studied us. And of course, we knelt. I mean, all of us of African extraction knelt. The Norwegian didn't kneel down. So I reached up and got his coattail, and he came down with us. You're getting ready to mess up my meeting, you know. We got up, and then we sat down, and she began to talk in Luganda. Now, these were the Baganda. And the Baganda lived in the country of Buganda, which was in Uganda, and their language was Luganda, okay? And there's a story there, too. Let's finish this one. So while we're down there, then we get up when she sits down, and we wait. And she began to converse in Luganda. So I don't know what she's saying. After a while, she looked at me and said, teacher, what brings you to my country? I said, well, your Royal Highness. I said, there are 22, at that point in time, 22 million people of African extraction like me across the great waters. I said, and I have come here to share my religio-socio-educational lectures with your subjects. And I really would be overjoyed if your Royal Highness would attend. And I shut up. She let out conversing again in Luganda. Finally, she stood up. She said, "Teacher, I will be at your opening meeting." Now, I got a problem. If she shows up there, which I hope she would, we had to build another platform in front of my platform from which I would preach. And it had to be equal in height to my platform. And we got a mission sofa and put it on the platform and decorated it with royal colors, gold and crimson and blue, see. And we put 3 chairs to the right of her chair and 3 chairs to the left of her sofa chair. 5 o'clock came, no queen. I started my meeting. Pretty soon we heard sirens. 6 motorcycle cops driving in front of a giant black Rolls Royce. They pulled up and stopped and the dust flew. Then the people, oh, by the way, when that car pulled up, everybody stood. So I stood and I shut up, The crown prince got out and escorted the queen, 3 palace attendants on one side, 3 on the other side. Everybody standing at attention. She climbed her platform and she sat down, and then everybody else sat down. And whatever I was doing when they came in, I could now resume, okay? I preached on the subject of handwriting on the wall. The worst subject for a woman to come out of a palace to hear, I thought. But I went ahead and preached it. Bible said they drank wine before the thousands. I beat up liquor. And it said that Belshazzar drank before his wives. And by the way, she was the head wife of about 4 wives in the palace. And I kicked that all over the place like a football. And when I got through preaching and made my appeal, and I had them sit down and stood and held my breath, that woman stood up. She said, "I will be back tomorrow night." Royalty came to my tent every night, and because the queen was there wasn't room to hold the people. And finally, the Archbishop of Canterbury in England heard that she was coming to the meetings and said her word that he would cease his intercession for the king to be returned by the British government to his throne if she continued to come out and listen to that meeting and worship at that meeting. She sent me word. She said, "But my husband in London says you can come to the palace and teach us." So for the next few weeks, every Tuesday and Thursday, I would go to the palace with 3 of my elders. She would bring the 35 palace attendants in and make them sit. Some were Muslims, some were Catholic, some were other different faiths. And they had to sit and listen while I gave her the full treatment of what we did at the tent. When it was over, we baptized the crown prince, who was a degreed man, and he became local elder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and died in that position. We baptized about 15 Hindus out of the palace and an assortment of Christians from the palace. That was Kampala, Uganda, 1955. But I told you there was a side story here. When I landed there, I was anxious to learn the language, so I went down and bought me a dictionary, a Luganda dictionary. And I started practicing the words. Wasusio chano sibo, that's good morning, sir. Osibio chano sibo, that's good afternoon. Oh, I practiced real good, went downtown, stood in front of the post office and decided I saw an African standing there reading the newspaper. I decided to try my newfound language on him. I said, Wasusio chano sibo. He just kept looking at the paper. I said, Wasusio chano sibo. He looked at me funny and then went back at the paper. I said, he must not have heard me. Wasusio chano sibo. He put the paper down and looked at me and laughed. He said, hello, fellow. He spoke better English than I did. So you're talking about getting rid of my Uganda dictionary. But the most touching thing after having run a field school for the preachers, and I taught them how to do city evangelism. And when I left there, the population of the church exploded. They had a rule out there that if an African joined, you had to put him in a class for about 2 years, to get the heathenism out. They sent me there to baptize city Africans, who some of them had more education than I did, see? But they still had this division rule. I got down toward baptism, and the head of the division in charge of the whole area stopped in, an American. He said, Earl, I hate to disappoint you, but you can't baptize these people until they've been through the 2-year period of indoctrination. I kept eating. He said, you understand? I said, yes, I understand. So he got in the plane and left. So the mission superintendent wanted to know. He said, are you going to baptize these people? I said, did the sun rise? He said, I'm going to get the pool ready. I'm so happy you're going to do it because they don't even know what you have here. You have educated people, degreed people. The Crown Prince is a degreed man. The woman he married was a nurse, educated in England. And for the first time in history of East Africa, they had a church full of city Africans that were wage-earning people and educators. When I got back, nobody said a word. The word had already preceded me, that I had violated division policy and baptized these people. My rationale was this to the mission superintendent. Jesus said, go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them. I said, now there is not a 2-year requirement in the Bible between teaching and baptizing. I shall therefore baptize them and violate this policy. When I got back, there was silence for about 6 months. What they were doing was watching the experiment. I didn't know what they were doing, but nobody said a word about that trip for 6 months. And one day I went down to the General Conference committee meeting, and the president said, Earl, come up here. I'd like to say something. Stood me up in front of all of the elected secretaries. He said, 6 months ago, Earl baptized 109 city Africans, and most of them with advanced education. He said, what we've been doing is watching the experiment. It is the largest tithe-paying church in all of East Africa. Earl, praise the Lord for your meetings. So those are some of the things that happen. Now, if you go to that division, they're baptized like everybody else is baptized. The whole fabric has been destroyed.
Are we teaching the truth in love? Telling it like it is. Are we holding pure motives, showing that we care? Are we teaching the truth?